Hello, Savage Flight crew, viewers, listeners, friends, and foe. What I want to do is introduce. I know folks have been asking. I've gotten loads of tons of emails and direct messages saying, when are you going to have part two of the world of functional health and Doc Susan? And so, what we're going to do, I'm going to introduce you, Doc Susan, again. We're going to save on the introduction. She's a pro, she's an expert, she knows everything you need to know with regards to the functional health world, in addition to that whole world of activity based therapy and chiropractic. We got a superstar here who's back. So, for those who've been waiting and blowing up my email, I want to make sure you got episode two. Now, today we're going to zero in on a very popular topic that we've all focused on, whether we're athletes or not. And that word is inflammation. So, without further ado, we're going to jump right in this episode and talk about inflammation. How you doing, Doc?
Good, good. Thank you for having me here.
Thanks for
Really want to
being here.
dive into, yes, thank you. I really want to dive into our nutrigenomics sports performance space. Again, our first topic definitely is inflammation, and all disease states start with inflammation. Everyone knows this. And oftentimes, people don't understand the components of inflammation. So, we're going to talk in a little bit of a series today, specifically on one of the key elements of inflammation, so especially our listeners can really dive into this inflammatory nutrigenomic space. And the first space really is this omega-3 fatty acids.
Okay.
I'm certain that most people know about these fatty acids. So I'm ready for your questions, Coach Nick.
Well, that's going to be the first question. See, that's one thing about the smart people, which I'm on that other side, or at least I'm going to represent them. Don't assume that anybody knows, one, how does inflammation have anything to do with the athlete and where does it show up? Because a lot of people don't really understand even inflammation. And two, know omega 3, omega 6, or we'll just say omega in general, don't make that assumption either. So, could you answer that first question? Is how does inflammation play in the body of an athlete?
Yeah, so in an athlete specifically, obviously there's aggressive training. You're working in mesocycles, right? And there's a time when you're doing the training, and then there's a time when you are in performance mode. And in both cases, you're loading your system and you're stressing your system. When you do that, your body metabolically has to work appropriately, even down to the cellular level. And when you go through this intense training, I'm certain a lot of the athletes who've gone through your training have noticed that they get achy joints,
Oh,
they
not
get
mine.
sore, they,
Right.
they get sore muscles.
Hips.
They notice when they wake up in the morning that their bodies feel heavy. They have
Ah.
environmental stressors. Some of these athletes are still in school,
Right.
and oftentimes they're stressed out in other ways, not just from training per se. So, or they overtrained a little bit. We call that obviously delayed onset muscle soreness. A
Mhm.
couple, 2 or 3 days later after lifting, you notice that your body's sore and your muscles are achy and you can't do those exercises
Right.
that you used to be able to do. So
Never mind.
that's inflammation. And oftentimes people don't understand. And when we get to the brain, and I think this topic specifically in the inflammation space is associated with brain function as much as it is with you can get body inflammation and you can also get brain inflammation.
Ah, okay.
And at night, in our next topic, the next time we speak, we'll talk a little bit about sleep. But
Right.
at night, your body filters out that inflammation.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically in your cerebral spinal fluid, it's kind of like a filtering system that you do every
Okay.
day,
Mm-hmm.
like changing your oil filter. And if you're not able to filter out really well, guess what? It's going to compound to the next day and a compound
There we
to the
go.
next day and compound to the next day. And
Mm-hmm.
all of a sudden, what happens is those is kind of like in the human motion world when we say, hey, when you come in to see us for an adjustment or for treatment, um, you're in pain. Well, pain is the last thing you experience. Dysfunction and compensation, which you see in athletes in their performance, is really the first state of that dysfunction from a human motion perspective occurring. The same thing applies to inflammation and obviously injury pattern. If
Mhm.
we can address it at the front end and really address how athletes are able to recover so they don't have levels of inflammation that their bodies can't
Right.
recover from, their recovery rate is going to be so much better.
Right.
Their injury pattern is going to go down. And then you've got a happy functional athlete.
Okay. So the second question, thank you there. So I think everyone knows every one of those categories you hit, you're definitely going to hit them as a athlete or as a non-athlete. Right now, we're going to focus on the athlete. The second, and that would be, so what are the superpowers or the benefits of omega, right? And what are the things that you have to worry about, that put you at risk? So could you tell us?
Yeah, so the superpowers of not just omega 3, but omega 6, 9, 7, 11,
Okay.
5 are they're all anti-inflammatory to some level in some capacity.
Okay.
And the US population has been told over the last 40 years that it's all about this ratio between omega 3 and omega 6.
Wow.
And we've all been told, and most people, most consumers know, and athletes know that, okay, the American diet is super heavy on omega 6s, which tend to be pro inflammatory, and omega 3s, which tend to be anti-inflammatory, tend to be really low.
Hmm.
And I'm here to kind of like re-educate the population and
Okay.
say that's not the case
Mm-hmm.
because it's not just about omega 3 and omega 6. And
Okay.
the reason why we came up with that ratio is because the Inuits in Alaska. And
Mm-hmm.
we went up and studied these guys to figure out, okay, well, why do they have no cardiovascular issues? Why do they have no diabetes? Like, what are they eating?
Mm-hmm.
And so, but they're eating the whole fish.
Okay.
Okay. They're not just
Eyes and
eating
everything.
omega 3 and omega 6. Right.
Right.
So, the story we've been told is it's just about these two omegas, when in actuality, that's not the case. And kind of think of it in broader terms as in that omega 3 family, you've got, like, for example, 15 different types of omega 3s that haven't been
Okay.
discovered. Under omega 6, there are actually some really good omega 6s um, that allow your body to manage inflammation really well,
Mm-hmm.
where you wouldn't know because
Hmm.
you've been told that, oh, anything that has omega 6 in it is not good for me. And that's
Right.
just not the case. That's just
Okay.
not the case.
Okay.
So, as far as like risk is really understanding what is the source of that omega 3.
Mm-hmm.
And if it comes from a wild fish, which over 95% of the omega 3s are coming, omega 3s, omega 6s are coming
Mm-hmm.
from a wild source,
Mm-hmm.
there's absolutely zero control over that. And typically, when they farm these wild animals in the ocean, they're harvested at year 4 or 5. So when they're
Okay.
harvested at that point, they've already had what we call toxic level loads,
Hmm.
metals, mercury, etc., into
Wow.
that into the fish.
Mm-hmm.
So now what they do is they farm that wild fish and then they squeeze the oil out and they modify it.
Mm.
Okay, and typically they put like an ethyl ester backbone on it. Um, and what happens is you get something called oxidation.
Oh, wow.
And when you get oxidation, that creates free radicals, and free radicals create inflammation. So
Okay.
it's really important to further educate, especially the sports athlete community, to really understand that you need a broad spectrum omega to really get those
Hmm.
inflammation markers down. It's not just I need to pump my body with more omega
Mm-hmm.
3s. The other thing that's super critical is to understand is oftentimes when I do on blood work an omega check on a patient, which is looking at those ratios, if
Right.
they over supplement with just one of the omegas,
Hmm.
particularly the omega 3, their ratios actually switch.
Hmm.
Now they become deficient omega 6 and not omega 3. So it's super fascinating. You know, the body is almost like a Goldilocks. We've got these systems that turn systems on and turn systems off, and they all kind of work in synergy together.
Right.
So if you overdo too much, even in the nutrigenomic space, some people genetically are just omega 3 deficient
Hmm.
from the gate, but
Okay.
that is very rare. Most people are not getting the right ratios in the full
Hmm.
spectrum to really give them the nutrients to allow their genetics to really do the magic.
Hmm.
Um, so if that makes sense.
Yeah, so it's
So,
real important. What I'm hearing is it's real important that you have to know the baseline. You know, you got to know the history, and it's got to be precise. One of the reasons that we're getting together is that we have to find that intersection between precision training and precision medicine because everyone is not made the same, and you got to figure that out in addition to what that baseline is and what's the gap to create that improvement for
right,
that specific person or athlete. So,
right.
okay, well, you just schooled me. I mean, this is amazing that I didn't, you told me about, I didn't know you had fish that get farmed that are out in the ocean or water. I always pictured farming as, you have this private farm and you got your own stock. And those
Yeah, and
fish,
so,
they actually are
right.
out in the wild. Huh.
Well,
Didn't know that.
so we also, there are people that are farming the
Hmm.
fish, not the team typically in Norway, but
Okay.
Norway's got very strict rules.
Hmm.
But down in South America, there's absolutely no strict rules with the farming, and
Hmm.
they load antibiotics to these fish because they
Wow.
have to, because they can't keep the spacing. So up in Norway, they keep the fish spaced out as though they were in the wild, but they are farmed. And
Okay.
yeah, and there's a difference between obviously sashimi grade and actually wild as well. You will never find in a restaurant a wild raw salmon to eat.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, because of the health concerns. So that's why
Mm.
sashimi grade is the way to go. However, with that being said, saturated fats too are really important. Um,
Mhm.
we've been told that saturated fats aren't very important, and so in that fish will have healthy saturated fats, which is part of that component, which actually feeds the nervous system, because
Mm.
all those muscles in that athlete are controlled by nerves.
Okay.
Okay. And if those nerves
Right.
don't have a nice fatty layer, guess what? The firing system is off. Have you ever trained an athlete and it's like their motor system is just not, it's just like they just
Central
are having a,
nervous system. Yeah. The fast twitching, fast
yeah,
processing.
that's right. And that's due, predominantly due, and my theory is on all this, looking at all these athletes over the last 20 years, is we have a good essential fat problem.
Hmm.
You know, the nerves are not getting the nutrients they need, but um, understanding your genomics, understanding that that's the 10%, that's what makes those athletes so unique. Now we've got to figure out, okay, what are those epigenetic changes? What are we putting into the athlete? How are
Hmm.
we training the athlete that is modifying those genes? Can we maximize on that athlete's potential, knowing their 10% basically? And that your genetics don't necessarily define you, but it's kind of how those switching systems get turned on and turned off. And so,
Hmm.
really understanding and diving into, can I process fats really well?
Hmm.
Oh, yeah, I can't really process fats really well. Do I have excessive levels of inflammation? Sure. Genetically, like, am I more susceptible for
Hmm.
that? And so, it's really important. And that's where that uniqueness and specialization comes
Hmm.
into play. No longer are we taking a dartboard and going, well, yeah, I think I got bullseye.
Hmm.
We're being, on the clinician and the training side, we're being much more smart as far
Hmm.
as like how are we approaching that athlete to make sure that athlete is performing at that
Right.
optimal level? Yeah.
So let's say you're not, like I said, you're not in Alaska, or you could be in Alaska, but let's say for those listeners and viewers out there, is there some source? What's the best source
I'm
for?
going to say the best source is the people that I work for, which is Hofseth Biocare. They're up in Alaska, I'm up in Norway.
Okay.
And I will say that without a doubt, their stability testing is phenomenal. Every batch is the same, everything is QRC coded. Um, they control everything from seed to production, and we cannot feed the entire world
Mm-hmm.
off of wild salmon. However, we also need to make sure that we have a sustainable, clean,
Right.
quality for for patients and for athletes and
Okay.
anyone who is looking to improve their
So
health span.
supplemental, basically.
Yeah, absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely.
Okay.
And just so that you're aware, if you want to go to Costco or Aldi, if you go and look at the Costco Kirkland
Mm-hmm.
Signature brand in the frozen section for salmon, those that salmon is from Hofseth International, which feeds all of Hofseth Biocare. And those salmon, those sashimi grade salmon, cooks like no other. I've never tasted a
So that's a
salmon
good
so
thing,
delicious.
Sam.
It's a great thing. We are
Okay.
so
Okay.
blessed to have
Everyone
the
hear
people of
that?
Norway
Okay.
save us.
So you
Yes.
don't have to go to
Um,
Norway, you can go right to Costco. And I know there's a ton of Costco cult folks out there that are running. They get while they're getting their gas or waiting that line, go get your salmon inside. Okay, all right. Well, that we're going to stop right there because there's more to come in the future. As Doc is going to share each piece. Right now, we're focused in on inflammation. And Doc, what are we going to focus in on next in our next episode?
sleep. We're gonna dive
Sleep.
into sleep.
Who gets sleep? I mean, you must be kidding, right? No. Yeah. So we're going to talk about sleep, which is a big topic for me and for Doc, and for those especially interesting when you're dealing with the collegiate athlete, where if I recall in my days, yeah, you're sleep deprived all 5 years. I think the science has changed to make sure that we get our active rest and our rest. So, but we're going to stop right here. Doc, you have a great trip on where you're headed next. And I'm looking forward to episode 3. And with that, we're going to close this off. Thanks again for being with us here at Savage Flight. And now you have your next flight. All righty. Take care now.